This is the book that's available now or available in March for our esteemed audience to buy. It's the book I've just read and enjoyed. So in a book like Gold Rush Girl, do you start with, okay, I'm going to set this in San Francisco in 1948, or do you start with Tori? This is going to be the character that I love and know is going to have a great story.
Well, I want to keep reminding you that, and who's ever paying attention to what I'm saying, if anybody is, I write intuitively. I don't have a great deal of theory. I don't have a great deal of, I have process. I have a process I go through. But here's a case of how did this book begin? For example, I was in San Francisco and just visiting for a while and walking down by the bay in the area called the Embarcadero. And I saw all these flags fluttering from multiple flagpoles. And all of these flags had pictures of abandoned ships. That's all that was there. I'm thinking, what is this? I find out the circumstances why San Francisco Bay is full of abandoned ships. And the more I read, I realize there's a story here. And then I begin to think, what do I do with this? This is fascinating. And then I begin to think how I can create a story about this fact of these hundreds of abandoned ships. If you were to pick up the book, and you have the book on your hand, if you would turn to page, I don't know, 30, 40, I don't know where it is, that's where the book originally began. And then I realized I had to do more than that, explain how my characters came to X, Y, and Z. So it gradually evolves. I don't know at what point the full arc of the story evolved in my head. Strictly speaking, the very ending of the book didn't come into my head until I had been working on the book for a year. And, that in that ending, for example, was discussions with my editor. Well, we're not happy with the ending we have. Don't you think there should be something more? How would it revolve? All in the service of a story, not in the service of a lesson I'm trying to teach. I don't teach lessons. There's an old gag: if you want to send a message, use Western Union. But people don't know what Western Union is anymore, I don't think. So it evolves. All my stories evolve. I rewrite them endlessly. Things change. I was just working on something now. My protagonist needs to do X. Well, I haven't established why he would do that. So I go back 20 pages, 30 pages, and rewrite something that would allow him to do whatever it is I need. So there's no consistency in the way I create the story. What you read on page 30 might have been on page 2. What you might have read on page 1 might have been on page 60. Anything in the service of a good story is my approach.
So, okay, well, and that's while you're drafting that the character now needs to be this. You immediately go back and make the change, or is that once everything is done and then you make the change?
I constantly rewrite, even as I go. I rewrite the books I do maybe 80 times, over and over and over again. And they're constant changes. Hopefully a certain amount of deepening of the character, but also structural changes. Well, wait a minute. He's out at night. What is the moon? Is there a full moon, a partial moon? How dark is it? I better go back and do that. Well, he did this on page 7. He's got to do this on page 80, and so forth. So it's back and forth, back and forth. There's not 1 to page 300 in a shot. It's more like wandering around a labyrinth and then at some point making the road straight. So that's the way it happens.
Do you do any kind of plotting or strategizing along the way? Like, do you anything formal, like a bit of an outline, anything like that?
No, I used to when I first began as writing novels. I would construct a rather crude outline, and not infrequently, as I approach the ending of a book, I have to lay out a certain plot logic. But then I don't. I like to be surprised. The poet Frost, Robert Frost, he had a wonderful line that I dearly love. He said, "If there are no surprises for the writer, there are no surprises for the reader." And I love that idea. It's a wonderful concept. And so I'm open to whatever comes to me. And if I can fit it in and make it logical and work, I do.
And so, and this is all taking place during that same year while you're working on the book, so that by the time you're at the end of the year, you've got a mostly revised draft?
I hope so. But then, and then it's submitted. Usually my process is when the book I think is done, the first person who hears the book is my writer, my wife. And when I say hear, I read it out loud. And she's a very tough critic and a very good one. But reading it out loud, and I do it with a pencil in my hand, and I can make changes and adjustments even as I mark the manuscript, put an X, this needs work. And then I do revisions based on that reading. And then, for example, this afternoon, I have a favorite school that I go to, and I'm reading a new book. And I'll go back 5-6 weeks, read about 25, 30 pages a week. And they're great kids for listening, 5th grade. And we'll see what they think. Maybe they'll fall asleep. I hope not.
I can't imagine that they will. But you're reading new stuff to them, like a comedian almost working on a routine ahead of time. That's
right. I once saw this documentary. I think it was about Seinfeld, about how he was putting together a new show, and he would write his stuff, and then he would perform at this comedy club, that one, and he would, of course, remember which got a laugh, which didn't, and he would keep rewriting the sequence that he wanted until he got his performance skit, whatever you want to call it, his set, so that there was a laugh every other minute, and he would throw out the stuff that didn't, and so forth and so on. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable way to work.
Reasonable, but terrifying. You have to have some assurance if you're going out there before it's done.
No, I mean, first of all, when you read to kids, as I do in this way, they're extremely generous. And I'm not giving them a totally crude draft. This is a book I've worked on for a year already. So it's coherent, and it's okay. Probably not the best, but I can get a sense by reading it out loud. I have a sort of mantra that I really believe in, and that is sort of this. Writers don't write writing, they write reading. Writers don't write writing, they write reading. And so it's the reading and reading out loud that lets me hear the book as a reader. And it teaches me so much, the pace of the book, even repetitious words and phrases, even ideas. So you convert yourself into a reader, and that makes an enormous difference.
So knowing that your wife eventually is going to be the first person to experience the full story, do you tell her about your work before then?
Oh, she knows generally. She knows this book I'm reading, for example, takes place in Venice during the Renaissance. I dragged her there. I mean, have to go to Venice, you do, right? So.
Oh, the hardships of a
yeah,
writer.
I mean, it's tough. It's rough. Anyway, so of course she knew that I was writing this book, and it's part of sort of an extension of an earlier book. So yeah, but she doesn't know the specifics of it. I want her to experience it, but I don't like to talk about my books before they're done, because I find that it intellectually locks me in. If I say, character, this is a book about, this is a book that does. I don't want to. I want to be free emotionally to go any direction I want.
So by the time you get to the point of submitting a manuscript, how many times will you have typically, you think, read it out loud?
2 or 3. The editor I have worked with and most influential in my life was Dick Jackson, who recently died. He used to read his submissions, people who submit stories and the ones he's working on. He would read out loud too. So, I think Stephen King, I read somewhere, said, if you really want to go listen to an author, understand an author, don't so much read his books as listen to them. And there's a lot of truth to that.
And so I didn't see that you'd recorded an audiobook. Have you thought of recording an audiobook?
Most of my books have been recorded.
Oh, but I meant with you reading it.
You do it? I've done it a little bit. It's incredibly time consuming. I remember the first time I did it, I don't know if you've ever recorded, but you sit in a booth. Feels like a prison solitary cell, and you sit there and you have headphones on and you hear voices. And I remember starting to read the book, and all of a sudden a voice says, "Stop. You didn't pronounce that word correctly," or "You dropped the and from the sentence." Because as I'm reading my work, I'm making adjustments to it. I mean, that's the purpose of reading out loud. But this is a recording, and they're saying to the purchaser of this recording that it's absolutely verbatim text. And if I get it wrong by so much as one word, they're going to stop me and tell me to go back. It was an exhausting process. I hated it. And I've been asked to do more, but I don't have the time. It takes 2-3 weeks to do a recording a book. I can't do that. So I don't. And the people who do it are professionals, and they do it much better than I do.